There's not a lot of books that have consequentially altered the course of literally millions of people's lives, and arguably even the course of a nation's trajectory. You think of Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed, or Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. Frances Moore Lappe's book, Diet for a Small Planet, is one of those books. It's one of those books that has had an enormous impact on the United States and frankly all around the world on a whole bunch of different levels. And so I'm super pleased to have Frances Moore Lappe with us for the next hour as our Conversations with Great Minds proceeds, for our Conversations, the Great Minds Conversation. Frankie, welcome to the program. It's great to have you back on. It's been a while.
Very much. You are my hero. I hope you know. I hope that
back at you.
Yeah. Yes. So it's a thrill, a real thrill, and I just am so touched that you read that first section of the opening of the 50th anniversary. Oh, I'm so touched that you did that, because it really does express why I'm here again 50 years later.
Well, thank you. That was on our non-commercial stations when our commercial stations are in a break at the top and bottom of the hour, we insert Booker, and that was our book report. It was a short reading from Diet for a Small Planet. Frankie, I'd like to, since we have a little bit of elbow room here, we've got an hour to talk, I'd like to kind of break this into pieces and start out with just the my diet stuff. What impact does diet have on human health? What have we learned? What had you learned at that point in the late 60s, early 70s, as you were putting this book together and bringing it to print, that caused you to alter your eating habits with regard to? I mean, we'll get into the small planet part of it, but just the human diet health part of it. What did you know then, and what have you learned since?
Well, then I knew very little about the health part of it. I had grown up in Fort Worth, Texas, also known as Cowtown. So we ate hamburgers and roast beef, etc. So I did not know really much about the nutrition of it, meaning eating meat, not eating meat. What so alarmed me, what so shocked me, is the tremendous amount of waste of agricultural and our Earth's resources to produce that meat. We get so little back from the grain-fed standard that we had moved to, that I was just shocked that the experts were telling us that we were at the Earth's limits, when in fact we were actually shrinking the capacity of the Earth to feed us by feeding so much to livestock. Just to put a number on that, Tom, now about 80% of our agricultural land, including grazing, is devoted to livestock production that supply us with 18% of our calories. So that's some measure of how much is lost along the way. So actually at the time, the only evidence we had then in 1970, 71 was Seventh-day Adventists. Have you ever heard about that?
Oh, yeah. I knew some of them. And yeah, go ahead. Tell the story.
They were vegetarian.
Yeah.
And they, because there weren't, the evidence was that, hey, they don't eat meat. They don't, they're vegetarian, and they're doing a lot better on longevity in particular. And that was the only little piece of evidence we had then. But I really, in the first edition, wasn't so occupied with the health piece as I was the waste piece. It was before, of course, we knew the climate impact of a meat-centered diet and overall health and species decimation. As you read in the opening, I quote David Attenborough about how the grain-fed, meat-centered diet is implicated in this massive species extinction in which all life depends on all these critters. A lot of that is from pesticides, which have become so much more toxic and so are threatening many, many insect species. So that's my short kind of short answer to that.
Well, I recall in the 60s. I think I became a vegetarian in 67 or 68. And of course, vegetarian meant you were still eating dairy and still eating eggs, but those are pretty much the only animal products. And friends and parents and whatnot were saying, "Oh my God, you're going to die of a protein deficiency." And your book was actually one of the things that convinced me. I mean, it was half a decade later, but that I wasn't going to die of a protein deficiency because I was just. I mean, it was a kind of a combination of the anti-war movement, which many of us in the anti-war movement were becoming vegetarians as a statement of nonviolence. And then also I had taken transcendental meditation training, the Maharishi and all this, which is Hinduism, which is vegetarian. And so it just seemed like the thing to do. But you laid out in your book, combining different amino acids to come up with complete proteins. We now know that probably that concern was exaggerated, but the whole essential amino acids thing. And it was a remarkable revelation for me that that if you mixed beans and rice together, you got everything you needed, right? It was just as good as beef.
I
riff on that for a minute.
Yeah, I love that so many traditional diets throughout the world of indigenous peoples have combined grains and legumes, the peas, beans, and lentils. And I thought that was just so cool that our bodies told us what to do. And you're right that back then, I often, Tom, people would say to me, "Oh, you made peace in my family. That was your biggest impact because my parents thought I would die."
Yeah.
So
that's what my parents were thinking. Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So we've just grown now, and as I say in the new 50th anniversary edition, I've said, relax. Yes, there's maybe something to this complementary protein stuff, but we don't need to even think about it because if we eat healthfully, if we eat whole foods and for a range of foods, we get enough protein. Because Americans eat now, Tom, twice the proteins our bodies can use. And we do not store protein. We just use it as energy if we have more than we can use as protein. So it's really so much easier than we thought that we just can relax about it and just look for what's healthy and good. And just another thought I had riffing off on that was that, people said to me, "Oh, you're giving up so much and how is this sacrifice?" And I said, no. I just discovered that actually there are only a few kinds of meat. But if you turn to the plant world, you see multitude, all the variety of colors and taste and textures and traditions that you can choose from in terms of, Latin or Indian or Indonesian cuisine to get inspired. So it was always a journey of discovery, not a journey of deprivation or cutting back.
Well, and in fact, most cultures around the world historically, and this is also true of indigenous and aboriginal cultures, used meat not as a primary ingredient, but more as a condiment isn't the right word, but kind of a supplement to a principally vegetable diet, simply because of the availability of it, if for no other reason. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. People who lived in the Arctic, who are living on seals and fish, but by and large, that's the case, is it not? Most societies around the world are not meat-based in their eating to begin with.
Right, exactly. That, yes, in traditional societies, we evolved in these tight-knit tribal communities that we did eat meat when the hunter would go out and get some, and then we would share it. That's one of the things that I learned in anthropology, that it wasn't just the hunter's family, but everybody got to eat some of that. So it was a complement to the plant-based.
But I'm curious about how your personal evolution of what you eat, how you eat, has happened over all these years.
Sure. Yeah. I was pretty much mainstream, growing up, as I say, in Cowtown, and I did make this radical shift to the plant-based. I'm not a vegan. I do eat. I have cream in my coffee, and I do eat some cheese. So I it's pretty much happened when I woke up in the learning about how wasteful our grain-fed, meat-centered diet is, and I don't think it's changed radically since then because at all. I also wanted to point out that I had been this classic American female, I think common American, experience for females being obsessed about their weight and counting calories. I was one of those. And when I shifted to the plant-centered eating, I just got to the weight that seemed right for my body, and it hasn't changed in all those years. So that's pretty much who I am now, is where I was at the end of 1971 and going forward.
And it served you well, obviously. I think this is such an extraordinary issue. And how do we best do outreach to Americans who have been trained on the food pyramid, and the meat industry basically has been a large part of our lives. Just telling us, and frankly, I don't know what they're doing now in school, but when I was a kid in school in the 50s and 60s, it was you must have meat. It was
Mm-hmm.
part of a food pyramid. How do we react to that, and how has America changed in that regard with regard to education?
Well, I'm not sure about the education piece of it, but I do know that there is a much greater emphasis now on the value of whole plant foods, and we see this in the more community gardens there are, and the thousands of community-supported farms where you can, as we do here, we get a share that we have. So we have fresh produce all summer, and that in farmers markets. Wow, that's really taken off. So I think there's more awareness, and certainly I've seen the reports from the food industry saying that this kind of Whole Foods shopping is a greater share of increased sales in the food world. So. And of course, you go into any restaurant now, and there is almost always a plant option, mm-hmm. and that did not exist at all when I began. In fact, in my office here, within a few blocks, just in the last 4 years or so, I think 4 plant-centered options in restaurants for lunch have opened up, and so I just feel it here in the Boston area very strongly. This shift.
Yeah, and it's happening all over. Same thing here in Oregon. Protein Factory in reverse. Tell me about this, Frances.
Well, here's one fact from that Protein Factory in reverse: is that when we eat grain-fed meat, beef that is, we only get, of the calories that cow has eaten, we get 3% of the calories back in the beef that we eat. So that's what I meant. It's a big shrinking machine that we have created, and it's one that is implicated in a lot of our poor health. I just learned that the World Health Organization has now deemed processed meat, from hot dogs and salami, etc., processed meat as a carcinogen, and red meat as a possible carcinogen.
Wow. And so basically what we're doing by converting cropland, we take cropland, we grow crops, soybeans and whatnot. On that, we feed it to animals, and then we eat the animals, and we're receiving only 3% of essentially all the nutrients that were taken from the sun and the air and the water and the minerals and whatnot in the soil. We're only getting about 3% of that.
In the calories that we eat. It is the calorie to calorie from the feed, just the feed that is fed, the calories of the feed. Yeah, that's it. So
is there a political, is there a movement within the agricultural community now to try to move away from what do you call them? The crops that are grown to feed to animals, feed crops, toward fruits and vegetables, human food crops.
Yes, and yes, there has been, and I think for a long time, just the the difficulty. This is not going to surprise you, but our food system, the monopoly or oligopoly power of all aspects, up the chain of our food system in terms of, like meat packing or whatever the piece of the puzzle is very centrally controlled and takes seeds. When I began way back when, there were 50 seed companies competing to bring seeds of a variety of kinds to farmers, and now they're just about 4. It's just a handful that are so dominant. So I think it's much harder to imagine because so many farmers are stuck dependent upon just from year to year, dependent upon the structure of where they get their inputs, the fertilizers and the pesticides, and then how they sell it to the processors who turn it into a feed or whatever. So it is hard to break out of that highly concentrated system. But some people are doing it. I tell a story in the book about one of my favorite learnings has been the fact that trees and crops do not compete with each other. And around the world, throughout history, people have discovered that mixing trees and crops in the same fields actually benefits all in greater overall output. And so I highlight the Savannah Institute in Wisconsin that has taken the lead in this, and there are many others doing this as well that are breaking free from the dominant, wasteful, and so harmful practices. And just, ecological organic farming, it is expanding much faster than other types of farming, but it still is a small percentage in the United States. But even, what did I say in that chapter, that there are a handful of southern states that within 5 years doubled their organic acreage. So that is a sign that is significant, that people are looking to free themselves from the harms of pesticides. On that note, too, Tom, another thing that we can be grateful for Biden is that they finally banned now this, if I can say it right, the chloriferous, how do you say it? Yeah. It's I was practicing the pronunciation, but it is an insecticide that does nerve damage, especially children who are exposed to it, and that has now been banned.
Right. It had. My recollection is it had been banned by Obama, but the ban hadn't come into effect, and so Trump did away with it. Am I remembering that right?
Exactly. That's it. That's it.
And so Biden put the ban back into place. It's great.